Hello and welcome to We've finally done it. MacBooks are gonna fold up and go away.
Whoa! This is revolutionary technology. Imagine a computer that opens and closes.
So the big news, Apple is reportedly working on a 20-inch folding screen MacBook.
Not to be confused with the existing MacBooks, which have folded since roughly 1997. This would actually be a single OLED display that folds in half. Presumably, there would be some kind of keyboard attachment. And this is, while it seems kind of like goofy and stupid on the surface, a form factor that is beginning to get a lot of sort of relevance in the Windows space. So there's sort of two ways that you could approach it. Apple seemed like they're going for the foldable OLED, which is cool because it essentially makes it, imagine like a giant iPad that sort of folds in half. The other way that a lot of Windows devices do it, which I would actually argue is better, are devices such as the Lenovo Yoga Book or the Asus ZenBook Duo, which actually use two individual screens and a hinge.
So you mean like a Microsoft Surface Duo?
Yes! When you have the foldable OLED, the main problem, while the OLEDs are thin, because you have to have this massive hinge and all the support, these things are heavy and huge. It's hard for me to imagine Apple getting that to be engineered down to a sort of reasonable sort of spot without like carbon fiber or sort of very over-the-top materials. It's legitimately really useful to have a dual screen laptop that is easily sort of moddable, but that is not what the rumor is saying that Apple is actually going to do.
I've been kind of torn on how I feel about the dual screen laptops because the first Asus ZenBook I really like. I think that might be my favorite form factor.
But it's not
of it.
Apple. That's no way Apple's gonna do that.
You're right. Knowing Apple, that's gonna be a extra accessory to get because they're gonna be like, oh yeah, just use the virtual keypad.
So the rumor is that this is going to be several years away, as I'm sure you can imagine. What do they actually need to do to make this happen? Because first and foremost, macOS does not support touchscreen at the moment. Now, mind you, every year iPad OS and macOS get a little closer. So you can imagine a few years from now they have some sort of more touchscreen friendly version of macOS. But like, while I really value having a not touchpad but also physical keyboard, I guess if they were going to make a folding MacBook that was all screen, if the keyboard that you're touching on felt like an actual keyboard, much like the way that their force touch trackpads feel like an actual click, that would go some way into sort of convincing me, because the biggest downside with the ZenBook Duo is it's fairly thick. You still have to have two screens, you have to have the keyboard, it attaches, it adds some extra heft, it adds some extra weight. It would be really interesting to see if they were able to sort of solve for like, hey, I'm typing on a keyboard that feels like an actual keyboard. Would that actually push me over the edge to using it?
I don't know if you remember a while back, one of the first yoga books or whatever, had no physical keys.
Yes.
And that was a nightmare to type on. It was like vibraty.
That was like, what, 7-8 years ago? That was a long time ago. Like, if we just go under the assumption that Apple, looking for that sort of next generation MacBook, they're trying to expand the screen out, they have some clever hinge tech, that will go a long way. But you're right, they've got to have a good taptic keyboard. Other companies who are doing this, whether it's a foldable single OLED or dual displays that fold up, they all have touchscreen keyboards. None of them are good. In fact, most of them don't even have haptics at all. You just tap on glass. If I'm giving them like a massive benefit of the doubt, we're a few years in the future, 2-3 years from now, and they're selling you a laptop that's about the size, maybe a little bit smaller, that just the screen rolls all the way down. And if they gave me the bottom part of the touchscreen, which was a good typing experience with some cool haptics or something, I could see maybe, but the problem here is that it feels like it's going to be enormously expensive. Is this even a MacBook? Or are they making a big folding iPad? It almost should be an iPad at that point, right?
I'm glad you bring up the iPad because one, let's talk about the Pro and then let's talk about the con of it. All the rumors of the new iPads, as of recording this, they have not come out yet.
Although probably going to be announced any minute now. Subscribe to This Is for breaking news updates on Apple.
All the rumors is that these are going to be so incredibly thin. I saw one rumor that was like as thin as the display of a current MacBook, which
that sounds like Jerry, everything's gonna snap that
thing. That does solve a lot of the problem of, hey, this is going to be super thick.
The problem isn't so much the actual screens, right? Like OLEDs are incredibly thin, but the difference is that you need a lot of structure.
Right. If they can fit in the entire M3 architecture into this, suddenly it frees up a lot of this. A lot of the support can just kind of go into where the existing M3 chassis is, which is under the keyboard right now.
I could see some scenarios in which this would be better. But they almost have to give macOS touch capability, but then that feels like that opens a weird can of worms. Like,
I feel like this is a conversation we've been having for the past few years of like, where does the iPad fit in? I feel like the base iPad makes sense. I don't know if the Pros is just like they're prototyping now to move into these types of things.
Yeah.
There's definitely a much bigger market for a cheap tablet that you could watch, you know, whatever.
It's the Cocomelon machine.
Yeah. There you go. Base iPad all day long. Again, all the rumors of the Pros, the iPad Pros, are like $1,400. Well, especially when you add in the keyboard and whatnot. Actually, it's like you could spec an iPad Pro right now more than a MacBook already.
Oh, good Lord. So yeah, the 12.9 starts at $1,100 now. Oh my God. So if I want to buy a 12.9 inch iPad Pro, so this is an M2, 256 gigs of storage, pretty reasonable, and the Apple Smart Keyboard, it is $1,400. That's more expensive than a MacBook Air, a 13-inch or 14-inch MacBook Air.
Yeah.
I did not realize that they've gotten this expensive. So we're recording this right after the M3 MacBook Air has gone on sale. If you want to outfit a MacBook Air M2 at $1,000 and an iPad Pro with the same M2 chip and a keyboard, it is the difference between $1,000 for the Mac and $1,400 for the iPad.
This is coming from people who loved using the iPad Pro.
Yeah,
like both of us dailied the 10-inch iPad Pro for a long time.
We're clearly on the eve of new iPads, and again, we'll be talking about those very shortly. Clearly, people are buying iPad Pros, right? Like they're still making them. And
well, so like my argument there was like, okay, well the iPad is still a nice companion to the a MacBook because of like sidecar stuff like that. But even that argument falls apart when you're adding essentially the same amount of real estate natively to your device. You know, like like I want that extra 10 inches. All right.
Why did I hear the in real life?
I don't care about having touchscreen on my laptop. Even when I use a Windows laptop that has it, I very, very, very rarely ever use it. I'm probably in the minority on this, but I'd be fine if this big folding screen that doesn't have a touchscreen, kind of like the first ZenBook where they shift the keyboard and trackpad down.
Oh, so you're saying it's like a 2/3 screen?
Yeah.
The more we talk about this, the more I'm not convinced that this is an actual MacBook. Most of the existing folding displays are like 12 inches for their normal configuration when you have the keyboard on. Like, so there's smaller devices. To me, this just sounds like this would be the next generation iPad Pro to justify the ludicrous price tag. I feel like while the rumors are calling this a folding MacBook, to me, it sounds like it's a folding iPad. Right?
I have the most evil version of this. The devil should hire me with how evil this is. It's a 3-piece system.
Oh God, that's too many pieces.
You buy 2 iPads. All right? You buy a separate hinge that docks the 2 iPads, turns it into a giant Surface Duo.
That sounds like an Etsy accessory I could buy. It's 3D printed.
I would be great at capitalism.
Pause. What? I think this will be a little bit clearer when we see this next generation iPad Pro release here.
We've said this for years now. The iPad is this cannibalizing this sale? Or is the MacBook Air cannibalizing iPad sales?
I will totally admit that the current iPad Pro does have a market. Now, it's not us, considering that the iPad Pro is more expensive than a Mac, and for our purposes, a Mac is going to do so much more. It's not really a hard debate. There are a lot of people who appreciate the simplicity of iPad OS and appreciate the fact that it's a touchscreen, that they can use it for Kindle and stuff. Like, I completely understand that that is a real market. And I'm curious to see when we have this brand new generation of iPad Pros, that next generation, I think, will definitely get me interested in going back to the iPad and seeing kind of like what they've done over the last few years since I've been sort of off of that sort of iPad Pro train. At a base level, I think it is very difficult for Apple to justify a $1,400 or $1,500 iPad that is essentially trying to be a laptop when they sell a $1,000 laptop, which is better for most people at most things. Like, I just think that that's a fundamentally difficult value proposition. And I would argue that if they are working on a folding laptop-like device, they would be better served by treating that as either the next generation iPad Pro or the iPad Pro Plus Ultra Edition, and selling that as like, it's got the touchscreen support, but you get an extra layer of functionality that differentiates the iPad. So it's not just iPad, it's like a Mac, except a little worse. Instead, it's like, oh, here's a folding iPad. It does all this extra stuff. You can use the pencil, yada, yada. Like, to me, that just fundamentally feels like it makes a lot more sense than Apple trying to sell me a MacBook Pro Minus that has a touchscreen only keyboard and like no ports or whatever. Like, it feels weird to me.
I feel like there's one variable that we haven't taken into account whatsoever.
What's that?
And that's the Vision Pro. If their whole thing is, oh, we want spatial computing to be the future, they need to start funneling people to Vision Pros. It's going to be very difficult for them to introduce a new product line of like whatever, like this hybrid, which like is not spatial computing whatsoever. But if they come out with something that I think is way cooler and way more functional than the Vision Pro, again, I think they're diluting their own strategy if they come out with some cool new laptop. If they're trying to convince everyone that this is the future, like how do you convince someone, hey, this product is the future, and then come out with something that is more functional for 90% of people? But whatever folding thing we're talking about now is going to be ludicrously expensive.
It will be.
Like,
it will be.
Because again, especially with your own argument of, oh, if this is going to be like the iPad, well, let's look at their iPad mentality. I'm convinced that we'd have to get a physical keyboard if you want one as a separate accessory. Yeah. Look at how they're pricing an iPad. Now add another 20% on top of that have all the accessories. It's not inconceivable to think that this is going to be starting at like $2,500, $3,000, which puts it in iPad land. I mean, in Vision Pro land. Yeah. You're splitting your own customer base, which is not a bad thing, but that's not what Apple typically does. Apple typically says, we want you to go down this route, and this is how we're going to focus everything.
So I read an interesting stat the other day. It was something like 90% of all Macs are either MacBook Airs or MacBook Pros. If you think about it, Apple sell a lot of Mac laptops, and that's largely it. And if you look at the iPad line, I don't know the actual sales numbers. I would guess that the normal iPads, like the non-Pro iPads, probably outsell the Pros because like the Pros have a space, but it's for a more particular kind of person who has a lot of money and doesn't want to deal with the extra complication of computers when they can use something that's super simple, just an extension of their phone. It's interesting to think about kind of how they approach this because you're right, Apple Vision, it's largely, hey, what if you could run iPad apps floating in your real environment? It's really, really cool. But to me, that's another signal that the Mac is the legacy. It's like, what did Steve Jobs used to call it? Like the truck. You always are going to need trucks, but not everyone needs a truck. I don't think Apple foresee 10 years from now 100% of people doing computing on Vision. I think it will become more popular, much the same way that the iPad is an option alongside computer stuff. It's not going to replace it. I think it's
what will replace it is the Apple Vision standalone thing, which is a holographic projector, which projects your stuff on the wall. The Apple Home has a holographic projector in it.
I think that the Mac is kind of what it is. It is slowly going to get closer and closer to iPadOS over the years. But the real innovation when it comes to Apple, what they're going to be pushing forward is the iPad, Apple Vision, all of which run iPad-style apps. That's the way forward. I think as much as it would be really interesting if they sold like a dual screen, like ZenBook Duo-style MacBook, I don't see that that is in the cards. They're going to keep selling you MacBook Airs, MacBook Pros. We're going to have an M3, then an M4, and an M5, and they're going to be really powerful and really nice. But ultimately, I think that Apple have to keep their spiciest innovations for the other categories like the iPad, because otherwise, what is the point?
You're going to get two iPads.
No.
Put them together.
Thank you very much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring the ding-a-ling button. Otherwise, this madman is going to come to your house in the middle of the night, glue your iPad and your other iPad together.
I've done it before. Look at the Switch book.